quality of legal services provided by other law firms. People across Alabama are hurting. Elected leaders have bailed out corporations while sending only a one-time cash payment to working families despite record unemployment and a public health crisis. Hometown Action is fighting for working people across Alabama to build inclusive and sustainable small town and rural communities. Hometown Action demands that Congress pass a people's bailout that expands health care, sends cash payments to families, and invests in green jobs to restart the economy. Now is the time to act. Learn more at www.hometownaction.org.
Hey, you listen to conservative talk radio all week. Why don't you try something different for a change? The Majority Report with Sam Cedar is a 5-time award-winning daily left-wing political talk show. We go live every weekday at 11 a.m. Central Time on our YouTube channel. You can find it by searching for The Majority Report. We talk about the news, we take libertarian callers, we have debates, we interview guests on topics ranging from the post-Civil War Reconstruction era, child poverty, capitalism, the intellectual dark web, and more. And that's all just within the last month. If you want to hear what smart, progressive political talk that is occasionally amusing sounds like, then you need to tune in. And you're always welcome to call in if you want to hear the correct opinion on any given topic. I will give it to you. Tune in to the Majority Report at 11 a.m. Central Time on YouTube or later wherever you get your podcasts.
WVNN. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
The time has come for America to hear the truth.
We are going to stand with them, and not only are we going to fight for their rights, but we're going to stand up for our rights here in our state, in our homes, and in our community.
One day longer, one day stronger. One day longer, one day stronger.
Because the future of labor's rights in the United States of America is not going to be decided in the courts. It's not going to be decided in Congress. It's not going to be decided on talk radio, and it sure is not going to be decided on Fox News.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong.
Good morning, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, David Story. It is Saturday, February 20th, 2021, and we're broadcasting live online and on the radio on WVNN in the Huntsville, Decatur, Athens listening area from Athens, Alabama. A recording of this program will play tomorrow, Sunday, February 21st, 2021, on the great WGOL in Russellville, Alabama. Today, we are talking all about teachers and school reopenings with Kenzo Shibata, the functional vice president of the Chicago Teachers Union, and he'll be taking your calls with us, so remember to get that number queued up, 1-866-494-9866, all morning here on today's Valley Labor Report. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Here's an announcement right at the top. The North Alabama DSA is holding a necessities drive every Saturday. That means this Saturday from 3 to 5 p.m. at the IBEW local Union Hall, local 558 Union Hall, on Clinton Avenue, right across from Yellowhammer and Campus 805 in Huntsville. So if you're in the area, you want to drop off some clothes, some non-perishable food items, blankets, then swing by the IBEW Union Hall right across from Yellowhammer and Campus 805 from 3 to 5 p.m. this Saturday and every Saturday. Follow at DSA North Alabama on Twitter for more information.
And all of that merchandise is going to the Manor House, so it's being distributed very well, and they really need PPE as well. So if you've got hand sanitizer, go by Costco and support the Teamsters out there and pick up some hand sanitizer and take it over to them, or some masks.
Yep. So if you want to see what we're up to throughout the week, get our snide quips about the news of the day, then you should follow us on social media. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/The Valley Labor Report. We're on Twitter at Labor Reporters. I'm on Twitter at JacobM_AL. David is on Twitter at Radical Unionist. That's spelled RADICL Unionist. If you missed part of the show and want to go back and watch it later, you can search YouTube for The Valley Labor Report and subscribe to our channel. You can go back and watch the full show there, and we clip segments and release them throughout the week. We also upload the program on more than 11 different podcasting apps. So to see if we are on your listening platform of choice, go to thevalleylaborreport.transistor.fm/subscribe. We've got a website, thevalleylaborreport.org. And finally, if you appreciate our work and want to help us stay on the air, then consider throwing us a couple dollars a month on patreon.com/thevalleylaborreport. So let's get to the show. Kenzo Shibata is the functional vice president of the Chicago Teachers Union. He is the host of a fantastic podcast and YouTube show, Class Time with Kenzo Shibata. And obviously, he's an educator. He's a teacher in Chicago. As a consumer of media myself, I've been seeing teachers get hit from all sides, from the right certainly, but also people who are ostensibly liberal or on the left, and no teachers are being hit harder than the Chicago Teachers Union. So naturally, that's who I wanted to talk to, because I think fundamentally the coverage that they're getting is really radically lopsided against the workers and in favor of the boss. And so I wanted to talk to Kenzo, and so Kenzo, brother, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today. I really appreciate it.
Jacob, David, thank you both so much for having me on. I really appreciate that. I'm really excited about this, the show and the project you're working on, and glad to be sharing the CTU story with y'all.
Absolutely. We're really excited to have you on. So before we get into what it's like to be a teacher in the pandemic and the reopening fights, stuff like that, I wanted to pay tribute really quick to Karen Lewis. She was the president of the Chicago Teachers Union, and she, along with others, really transformed the Chicago Teachers Union from sort of a complacent, kind of inactive union into really one of the most powerful unions in the country. And I think that anybody that's really deep into the labor movement knows her name and knows what she was able to accomplish, and really aspires to be like half or a quarter as effective an organizer as she was. And you got to be right there with her. Like, what was that? What was that like?
Life-changing. That's the bottom line was, knowing Karen even a little bit is life-changing, but I got to know her really well. Like when we were first forming a reform group within our union called CORE. Basically, the way a union work is you can form a caucus within your union of members who feel a certain way about something. And we were very passionate about ending school closings because those were happening at a very fast clip as a part of this privatization scheme from our old mayor. The scheme was called Renaissance 2010. And the idea was to build 100 new schools, 2/3 of which would be privatized or charters over the course of 10 years. And Karen and, a number of other folks, Jackson Potter, Carol Kareff, Nate Goldbaum, we came together and we literally were hatching our schemes at Karen Lewis's kitchen table and before anything else happened. And she was someone that became a huge political mentor to me, and not just to me. And, you don't want to say like, you want to say like, a movement doesn't need charismatic leaders. But what Karen gave us is not just, she wasn't just a charismatic leader. She trained a lot of us to like her methods of politics. And, I would say that the reason why the CTU has been capable of continuing on this fight since she retired was because of the lessons she imparted upon us. So it just, it's been a rough couple of weeks, realizing she's not going to be there with us anymore in physical, in physical self. But she has been working her butt off,
you can say
organizing
you can say
and
ass.
teaching. I can? Cool.
You just that.
For decades. She deserves the rest now. So I think that's kind of what we've all been saying, is that people keep saying rest in power, but we're like, she deserves some peace right now. She's had almost 70 years of power.
You know, and what you said is really speaks to a lot that I talk about constantly. Is we try not to have, the type of leaders that gatekeep. We're constantly in unions. We have leaders that want to maintain power, and everything that I've read from Karen, showed that she was the type of leader, and you spoke to it, that brought up everybody around her and helped train those and created a movement instead of a one person show.
Right.
And I think that's important in unionism, is that solidarity amongst everyone.
And I think the result of her work kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah.
All across the world, you get these left-wing movements. A lot of times they happen in politics in the electoral arena, but that they center around a person. I mean, we can look at Bolivia for an example of that. Evo Morales did a lot of good for the people of Bolivia, and he built up a real big base of support. But he was worried that he wanted to coalesce and keep power for himself, and so he went against the term limits. And we had a whole series on Bolivia, and obviously there was a coup there, but there's a lot to criticize Evo for. And Karen Lewis, she she's gone now, and she's not been the president of the Chicago Teachers Union for some time, and y'all are still fighting, y'all are still powerful. That's the kind of leaders that we need, the leaders that build up movements that can fight and sustain themselves after they're gone.
Also, what I loved about Karen, what made her so effective as a leader of teachers, specifically Chicago public school teachers, she taught for 23 years, and she taught for most of that time at Lane Tech, which is a school on the north side. But it was a magnet school, so it attracted students from all over the city. And then towards the end of her teaching career, she taught at Martin Luther King College Prep, which is on the south side in actually the community she lived in. And so when we were first campaigning in 2010 for CORE to elect her as president, people knew who she was. People were like, she taught a lot of people who then in turn became teachers. So many schools we went to, people had a Miss Jennings story. That was her maiden name. And, you'd go and you'd hand out flyers, and you'd talk about CORE, and they'd be like, oh, Miss Jennings. Cool. Right. I remember Miss Jennings. And if you think about it, there's only 600 schools in the CPS. And to run into people like that, I mean, I think that's also something that we should look at as organizers, having that. I don't think Karen, when she first started teaching, wanted to become the president of the union, but just her being such a great teacher and such a, totally part of her own communities, not like an outsider, that paid off in the end. And I think that's something that, young leaders can kind of look at, just build these relationships over time, maybe before you run for something.
Right. Yeah.
Not that people shouldn't run, Jacob, you're, a leader, and I'm very proud of that. But, there are some cases where people get a little hasty, I say.
No, yeah, I think that's right. And I think that, I think that it's good for people to, to do the work and to try to make those relationships before, we're restarting the North Alabama Labor Council here in the area. And, there was a couple folks who encouraged me to run for president of the council. And I was like, well, I'm not, I've only been a union member now for 2 or 3 years, and to be the president of a labor federation in an area, I'm not sure, I want to do as much work as I can and as much good work, but I want to take some time and learn from folks and build those relationships and build confidence in people. And that on your last podcast, you talked about how that would be something that you would like from to be at the head of the Board of Education in the board of Chicago Public Schools. You'd like somebody that was a real educator, that that somebody that if you were to have a boss, you'd like the boss to be somebody that was actually an educator and wasn't somebody that just went into teaching so that they could be in administration or just come out of schools. And I think that goes for leaders of all stripes. It would really be good to have leaders that are kind of reticent to be leaders, that want to be workers, that want to be movement folks, but they're so good at it that everyone pushes them up into leadership.
And I think with that, even beyond having the head of the schools be an educator, I want the head of the schools to be accountable to the community.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is, if you go into Chicago, to back up a little bit, we have an appointed school board that is completely appointed by the mayor, who in 1995 got complete control of the schools. And naming the entire Board of Education gives them so much power. They always name people that are accountable to them politically and not to the students, parents, and taxpayers, for example.
Right.
In our communities, what we have where you have an elected school board, you go grocery shopping at the same stores as people on your school board. So like, if you're really unhappy with something that's going, you could say, hey, I'm out getting milk. I run into the president of the school board. I'm going to bend your ear for a minute. Right. And they know that like people are going to keep bending their ear until they do what the community wants. We don't have that. And, I think that's also another thing, to go back to Karen a bit. She lived in the community she taught, and she was very accountable. She knew her neighbors. Her neighbors knew her. She made no secret about the neighborhood she lived in. And, she took good and bad from that. Like, she definitely was the target of harassment because of that. But also, she was constantly listening to people and listening to their problems, and not just to teachers, but to parents and students.
We're going to pick that up on the other side of the break. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time, but the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtandj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
All workers deserve fair wages, affordable health care, and a retirement plan that enables them to retire with dignity. All workers deserve to have a say about the terms and conditions of their employment, not just the bosses. With the machinist unions over 600,000 members having our back, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama has been serving workers' interests for over 20 years. Our members have the best health insurance in the area with zero deductible plans. We set the bar for pay in the area with over $40 an hour rates, consistently averaging the highest non-college degree jobs in North Alabama with some of the best retirement plans in the industry. We can do the same for you. Together, we remain united, raising our voices to ensure justice on the job and service in the community. The Machinist Union is a true Southern union founded in Atlanta in 1888. We have been serving members' needs for 132 years. The longevity of our union proves our dedication and loyalty to the working class. The Machinist Union isn't just for machinists. We represent workers in government, healthcare, auto workers, aerospace workers, transportation workers, the defense industry, and woodworking. Our members even build the iconic Harley-Davidson motorcycles. If you're ready to get serious about better benefits and wages, if you want to have a voice in your workplace with over 600,000 members to back you up, call or email us today at 256-286-3704 or organize at iamaw44.org.
Here in Huntsville, federal employees are an invaluable part of the nation's defense, offering unmatched expertise in engineering and technology and as stewards of taxpayer dollars. What we ask for in return is to be treated with fairness, dignity, and respect. The American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE Local 1858, is a union of working people looking out for each other, making sure that we're treated right. To inquire about joining or to learn more, call 256-876-4880.
Hey y'all, are you tired of hearing that the South is just a bunch of racist rednecks? Well, tune in to Dixieland of the Proletariat podcast. We talk about Southern working class history and current events through a leftist perspective. Join Nelson, Senior Telecommunications Director Tommy, Comrade Kate, former pig farmer Tyler, and Brother William, wherever you stream your podcast. And good Lord willing, the creek don't rise. We'll see y'all next time. It's Dixieland of the Proletariat, y'all.
WVNN. Depend on it.
Let's go!
All Welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host David Story. On the line, we've got Kenzo Shibata. He is the host of the excellent Class Time podcast.
Yeah.
He is the functional vice president of the Chicago Teachers Union. Kenzo, thanks for being with us. We've been talking about Karen Lewis and some of her legacy, and I think one more thing that I'd like to talk about, and then I think that'd be a good segue into what we've been dealing with today, is the strikes that y'all led earlier in this decade. Because one of the things that we hear today about, and we've always heard, but it's especially prominent today that we've heard about teachers, is that they're lazy. They want to do the most work for the least amount of money. They don't care about their communities. They don't care about their children. And the strikes and what y'all were demanding in your contracts that y'all went out on strike for, really, I mean, it flies in the face of that kind of logic. So can you talk about those strikes earlier in the or last decade? Now it's 2021. Can you talk about those strikes and why y'all were striking and the community support that you had?
So yeah, thank you for that question. That really sums up, I think, the core of what we our project has been, which is creating a seamlessness between the teachers union and the community we serve. That we hold meetings that include people who are not members, who are parents and students and community organizers. We do a lot of work with the Black Youth Project and Asada's Daughters, all these youth and Black-led organizations, and that's why it's courted a little controversy in recent years with our steadfast support of Black Lives Matter in the Chicago Teachers Union. But the question you have to ask is so who are we serving? We're serving mainly working in class and poor students, Black and brown. We need to stand up for them, and if we don't stand up for them, they won't be able to thrive, and and ultimately they will bust the union. So there's both the right thing to do, and there is some self-interest in creating these deep ties. And we started doing that in CORE before we even took union leadership, starting in 2008 when we first formed. We had close ties to groups like Blocks Together, the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization. These are groups that will do direct action and aren't really well liked within the nonprofit industrial complex kind of community, not the nonprofit world where people rub elbows and have galas instead of do organizing work. These are groups that we worked. The groups that we worked with did organizing, got arrested. And then, we learned these tactics and strategies from them, got arrested alongside them a few times, and put our skin in the game and showed that, we truly do care about this, even when there wasn't, any money to be made. If we weren't in union office, this was stuff that we were doing on our free time. And that built a lot of trust with the community. And by the time we were ready to negotiate our first contract in 2012, that was a wild time. Rahm Emanuel was in office for only 1 year. He hated us. He was constantly attacking us. The first thing he did in office was take away.
Wait, hold on. Just real quick, Kenzo, wait. Yeah. Rahm's a Democrat.
Absolutely.
Aren't Democrats in the pockets of teachers unions?
That's the funny thing. That's the huge contradiction there. Is that well, of course, with Rahm Emanuel he's a national Democrat, even though he's from Illinois. He was in the White House. He was a congressman. And the bottom line on his demise, I think, was he tried bringing that Washington DC energy to Chicago. You can't really do that, because when you're doing your politics from DC, you're not really connected to your own community, and your bad decisions aren't always reflected upon you. He could go on news and say positive progressive things, and Chicagoans liked him while voting for Forever Wars, for example. You can't do that in your own backyard. And what happened was, when he started doing his stuff in his own backyard as mayor, we would protest, not at his house because that's illegal, but there would be marches in his neighborhood that, coincidentally would be around his house, his life became pretty unbearable. And, I think that us as the teachers union, having those strong ties to these community orgs, and bringing critical masses to these kind of demonstrations, we also brought along a few other people who I think were not as militant as us. So we exposed a lot of contradictions in that Democratic Party, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out because, teachers, not just in Chicago, not that, that's operates in a vacuum. Teachers across the United States constantly get the blame for the failures of the administration, the legislators, and administrators in the school districts, especially in metro areas and areas like that, where they may perform a little bit more poorly. But the problem is, and it's the same, we have the exact same problem here in Alabama. The problem is the teachers' hands are tied, completely tied by the legislature, completely tied by the administration. And I think it's important for the general listeners out there to understand that the teachers, bringing it back to what Jacob said, are fighting for the community. They're not concerned about what the legislators think. They're not concerned about what the administrators think. They're trying to do what's in the best interest of their students and their students' families. And, that y'all have done a good job of making that well known. And some of the others, with West Virginia, one of our good friends was a teacher there, and they've done a wonderful job. But I think that's important to point out that typically the issue in schools is not with the teachers. The issue at school is with the legislators and the administration that's never taught in their life. Never sit down and try to teach a class of 30, 35 students.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. The catalyst for a lot of the problems we have here is these 1995 laws that were passed in our state legislature. And, to give a little political context to that, remember in 94 when Newt Gingrich did this Republican revolution and took over Congress, that had a down ballot effect as well. So for the first time in a long time, Illinois had a Republican state house, and that Republican state house really liked Democrat Richard Daley when he was trying to rebuild the machine that Harold Washington's coalition destroyed, our one progressive awesome mayor a couple decades ago. But yeah, when Daley had made this pact with the Republicans downstate to take over the schools, because there's a lot of coded language about Chicago when you go into the suburbs or downstate. They don't want to take, they don't want to quote unquote, take care of our problems. So that is how the mayor got total control of the schools.
Yep. Yeah, we're going to pick that up on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. This is the Valley Labor Report.
Huntsville's #1 news, talk, and weather station. WVNN Athens. WVNN FM Trinity. A Cumulus station. It's 10 o'clock.
From ABC News, I'm Brian Clark. 77 Texas counties have access to emergency federal funds after President Biden declared a major disaster following this week's winter weather that knocked out power to millions. The power is coming back on, but water supply is a problem.
We've been under this boil water notice for a couple of days, and so we've used up most of the bottled water that we had.
People turning to distribution centers as they wait for service to be restored. For plumbers like Houston's Everardo Almeida, the calls for issues like burst pipes are never ending.
Never seen it before, and it's scary because you could turn the water on and you don't know you could flood the whole place out.
The weather's made a national impact on coronavirus vaccine distribution. Appointments have been delayed or canceled in many areas because of shipping problems. But Andy Slavitt, the White House senior advisor for COVID response, tells ABC that situation is getting better.
Yesterday was a very good day. We shipped over 4.5 million doses, so we caught up a lot.
President Biden Friday toured a Pfizer facility in Kalamazoo, Michigan that's manufacturing vaccines. He then touted his stimulus package. It's worth almost $2 trillion, and addressing Republicans who say that's too much money.
Let me ask them, what would they have me cut? What would they have me leave out? Should we not invest $20 billion to vaccinate the nation?
House Democrats Friday released the full text of their 591-page bill. It includes an increase in the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. It's expected to pass the full House sometime next week. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said Friday, even though there's a May 1st deadline for a total U.S. troop withdrawal from Afghanistan, no final decisions have been made.
As we move forward in our review, we will consult with our NATO allies, our resolute support partners, and, of course, the government of Afghanistan. And there will be no surprises.
He urged the Taliban to reduce violence. You're listening to ABC News.
Paid for by Asset Marketing Services, LLC.
Have you heard? A secret hoard of 1902 Morgan silver dollars has been found. These gorgeous 1902 O Morgans are as bright and shiny as the day they were struck, and less than 500 of these coins are available. Coin experts are calling the Great Southern Treasury Hoard an incredible opportunity. Just call govmint.com at 1-800-859-1518, and you're guaranteed a mint condition 1902 Morgan silver dollar featuring the iconic O Mint mark of the New Orleans Mint. These 119-year-old coins were found in sealed bags that have been untouched since 1902. That makes these unopened bags of Morgan silver dollars extremely rare. To learn more, call 1-800-859-1518. Call now and you'll receive a free American Coin Collector's Bonus Package, a $10 value, free with every order. Call 1-800-859-1518 now to secure your 1902 Morgan silver dollar coins before they sell out. That's 1-800-859-1518.
Hey y'all, are you tired of hearing that the South is just a bunch of racist rednecks? Well, tune in to Dixie Land of the Proletariat podcast. We talk about Southern working class history and current events through a leftist perspective. Join Nelson, Senior Telecommunications Director Tommy, Comrade Kate, former pig farmer Tyler, and Brother William, wherever you stream your podcast. And good Lord willing, the creek don't rise. We'll see y'all next time. It's Dixieland of the Proletariat, y'all.
Stay informed and entertained all day long. Only on WVNN.
Charge upon the land, a population burned up, bled dry. The marginalized multiply and unite to fight.
All right, folks, welcome back to Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison with my co-host David Story. On the line, we've got Kenzo Shibata, host of Class Time Podcast. You can find that on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. He is also the functional vice president of the Chicago Teachers Union. He just wrapped up, finishing telling us how, corporate kind of Democrats and in conjunction with Republicans in the Illinois state legislature got control of the Chicago public school system. And so what was it specifically that they were trying to push in those early when y'all went out on strike that the teachers in the community, which, folks talk about, the teachers unions, but when they talk about their teachers, their kids' teachers, they're like fine with them. But the teachers unions are the teachers, and especially the Chicago Teachers Union. I mean, I think it'd be good, Kenzo, if you could talk about the democratic process by which those strikes took place, because people don't really realize that they really buy into the whole third party kind of thing. The union is separate from the workers, but really the union is what the workers make of it. And so, what was it that these corporate Democrats and the Republicans were trying to push down the Chicago teachers' throats that last decade they were just like, hell no, we refuse, and went out on strike?
Basically, it started with Rahm Emanuel was the mayor of Chicago, like I was saying, because the state legislature gave all the control to the mayor of Chicago. He or she has a huge amount of authority over the schools. And with Rahm Emanuel in charge, he also had a ton of money. So he has both authority and power. And so the first thing he did was he took away a 4% raise that was guaranteed to us because of a clause in our contract that allows him to rescind that raise if they could prove a financial emergency for the district. And, we did a whole campaign because we saw that they were hiding money to basically prove this. So he took away that 4% raise. That agitated our members quite a bit. And then he extended the school day based upon a lie. There was this statistic he kept moving around, which was later admitted, the person who wrote the talking point was a lie, that kids in Houston, because their school day is longer, have an average of 4 more years of school by the time they graduate. This was predicated on a lie because in Chicago, we negotiated a contract sometime, I want to say in the 80s or 90s, where teachers in the elementary schools, because the district couldn't afford lunch monitors, decided that they would take their contractual lunch break at the very end of the day and then basically monitor students as part of their duties during the student lunch. Rahm Emanuel used this in very bad faith and extended our school day. So now our school day is longer than almost every one of them. And there's been a lot of negative impacts on that. It's not just that we don't want to work as much, but like it cuts into our ability to coach. It cuts into our ability to facilitate things like debate club. So Rahm didn't actually bring any extra education to students. In some ways, students, I believe, are in the schools less because of that. So when it came to like fighting for our contract, we knew what we wanted, and we were, a pretty, fired up membership at that point. So, we asked them, what do we want? And members said, we want smaller class sizes. We want air conditioning in buildings that don't have it, because at the beginning and the end of the school year, it gets unbearably hot. We want to have a nurse in every school, which is still a fight. We finally won it, but it still hasn't been implemented, 10 years later. Wow. We wanted things that were mainly for the students and that would make our jobs not just easier, but make us more impactful in their lives. Like if a student is fed, has access to nurse, has access to a counselor, they're going to be more prepared to learn in our classrooms. And so we were really able to rally around that because that's what teachers wanted. And it took a lot of surveying our membership. It took a lot of surveying our community as well, parents, talking to students, doing everything we could to get it out there. And that became our list of demands. The problem being, when that 1995 package of laws were passed, one of them made it, it made it a non-negotiable, we couldn't actually bring to bargaining anything that wasn't pay or benefits. Yeah. And what that did was it allowed for 15 years of the Board of Education saying to the media, all the teachers want are raises. That's all they care about, because that's all we could strike over. What we had to thread the needle very carefully with in 2012 was when we would go out on strike, we were striking for wages and benefits and for unfair labor practices. We were not actually striking for class sizes or any of these other things that we were fighting for, but those were, we kept those on the table. And that was something that was very different about the way we negotiated. Was we kept a lot of things, or we wouldn't sign off on agreements on some things to keep other things on the table, and all those other things being class sizes, things that directly impacted our students. So we didn't settle on pay right away. And that's a risk, because the mainstream media then says, oh, well, they're holding out for more money. This class size stuff is a stunt. And then we have to and this is the really hard thing to get across to members, is kind of ignore the mainstream media and just keep on keeping on, because we're just not going to get good press from them. So we just need to, be our own advocates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that just such slimy? These politicians are telling you the only things you can strike over are pay and benefits, and then and you can't strike over classroom sizes, you can't strike over working conditions, anything like that. And so then when you strike over ostensibly pay and benefits, but obviously this other stuff is on the table, everyone knows what you want, and they have the audacity to go out in the media, oh, these greedy teachers are only striking over pay and benefits, and you're the ones that made it so that we can only strike over pay and benefits. I mean, that's just the most slimy, disgusting, revolting, I can't come up with words to describe how gross that is.
Part of it too is backing us into that corner.
Yeah.
Because if we were to say, no, we're actually striking over X, Y, and Z, things that are non-negotiables, they could have declared an illegal strike and, have an actual basis for filing an injunction. But one thing I do want to mention real quick is that when folks are worried about illegal strikes, which is a very valid concern, every strike that we've had in Chicago since we revamped the union in 2010, the mayor has tried to declare illegal and has, filed for injunctions. So every strike we've had, technically, in some ways, we are functioning as it being an illegal strike. But then afterwards, everything with the lawyers gets resolved. It's a pain in the butt, but it's just how we have to do it.
It's a pain in the butt, and it's demoralizing to your rank and file, because if anybody that's ever been in negotiations knows, just like your example is perfect, threading the needle. You really have to be careful of what you say during negotiations and even post negotiations with the media. Otherwise, you wind up in a lot worse condition than you are. But it's devastating, and they know the corporate lawyers that are on the administration side on your part, but on corporations on our part, they know exactly what they're doing. They're pushing our backs against the wall. So I mean, but y'all have done a great job with communication, and you being one of the communicating director previously kind of speaks to the ability to communicate to the rank and file teachers and members out there.
Yeah. So, Kenzo, you talked about some of the things that you did when you won nurses in every school. It hasn't been implemented yet. You won counselors in every school, which I don't think that has been implemented yet, or it's still working. And, those are things that y'all fought really hard for your kids to, have better schooling. And, I think even if that wasn't, technically what you struck over, y'all were definitely like, if you could, you probably would have, and you're definitely fighting for those kinds of things. And I think, that's like a good segue into, like, what has it been like teaching in a pandemic, teaching remotely, because you've demonstrated your concern for these kids already, and so certainly this disaster has impacted your relationship with your students and your ability to teach. So can you just talk to us about what it's been like being a teacher during this time?
If just focusing on the classroom issues, even beyond the political fights that we've been on, it's been really hard. That's what I think makes it so unconscionable that we've had to be in political fights during all this, is because just the matter at hand of educating students in this new way has been stressful enough and difficult enough. And it's, last year when we first went on distance learning, it happened because the governor forced the hand of our mayor. Our mayor did not want to close down schools. She let schools be open for one day beyond most schools in the state, and the governor just shut things down. And then we immediately were hit with this challenge. And I'm someone who's pretty tech savvy. I stream, I have a podcast and everything, but it doesn't necessarily translate one-to-one with teaching over Zoom or teaching over Google Meets, which is what is the only thing we're allowed to use in the Chicago public schools, which also is a host of issues. They already had the contract with Google. So what happened was they by default had to use Google. Google is huge of a corporation as it was not prepared for what was happening. So then they slowly had to add all these additional apps, because the idea of Google Classroom, I don't think, was to replace the classroom. I used to use it a lot before the pandemic, and I thought it was a great supplemental program. It doesn't substitute the classroom. And so we're trying our best. If the Board of Education sat down with the union like we asked them to from the very beginning to come up with a plan, I think we could have had something that worked out better. As it is right now, we have the longer school day, like I mentioned earlier. Rahm Emanuel pushed 10 years ago, and we haven't been able to peel it back. And Mayor Lori Lightfoot sees this as a boss, as through the eyes of a boss, not an educator. So she wants to make sure that we work. So she wants us to have 7 hours practically behind a computer, and it's draining us and it's draining the kids.
Yeah. And I think that's really important that folks kind of realize what it's like being a teacher during this time. We're going to talk some more about your experience being a teacher, some of the things that you've talked about on your podcast, and then we'll kind of go into some of the more political fights. You know, you've had some pretty high profile battles with your mayor, and you've been really tarred and feathered in the media by your mayor and by media all over the country. So, you know, we're going to talk about that on the other side. Stay tuned.
To the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time, but the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtandj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms. The Valley Labor Report is also supported by listeners like you. If you value the work that we are doing, injecting a different perspective into talk radio, and you have the means, consider signing up for a monthly donation on patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. Again, that's patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report to support our work and keep us on the air. If you're looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Iron Workers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Iron Workers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334. That's 256-383-3334, or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
Where Alabama talks. WVNN. Depend on it.
Lonely dead, stuck, bleeding pig. Lonely did I choose to dead.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host David Story. We've got on the line with us Kenzo Shibata. He is the host of Class Time Pod. He is the functional vice president for the Chicago Teachers Union. He's been talking to us some about what it's like to be an educator during the pandemic. How have your children been reacting to the remote learning? Like, how have they been holding up with it?
My students or my own child?
Yeah, well, both. Either. Either.
Well, I have a second. I almost gave him the wrong grade. I have a second grader, and we're very involved in his school. And it's right down our block. My wife is on the local school council. We don't have an elected school board, but we had this awesome program led by our former mayor, Harold Washington, which gave us these local school councils where discretionary spending, who the principal is, these are voted on by parents and members of the community. So, we're really happy with even the online education he's having. I will say this, though. That is because we are so involved in the school and we know so many of the teachers. We know the principal. We know so many of the folks there. One thing, though, that we did make sure to do, my wife being so involved as an elected leader at the school, she talked to every parent in my son's class because the principals, when the mayor started pushing this in-person learning, the principals were tasked with basically selling it to the parents. They could be sanctioned, their employees, they're kind of middle management. Even though they're elected to the schools, they can be fired by the boss still. So they're selling in-person learning. And, the job, my wife as a room mother, she was just calling all the parents and, having the one-on-one. She's a former labor organizer. So she was having the one-on-ones and, all but one decided that they didn't want to do the in-person. So my kid's poor teacher, who we love, and she's doing a great job, has to teach one kid in class and then another 15 kids online while wearing a mask, while that one kid is in the classroom in a mask behind a shield, a plexiglass. It's weird and it's off-putting. But because of all the work that we've put into making his school be, really responsive to the community, he's having a pretty decent experience with it. My students, I teach high school, and I have mainly seniors this year, and they hate it. They hate having so much screen time. That's the one complaint I hear the most. So I try my best to limit it as much as possible. But the Board of Education, as much as the union demanded, is not allowing us to modify the school day to cut back on screen time. And if you go to the suburbs, they are doing that. The schools systems that have, honestly higher test scores, they're lowering screen time to like maybe 2 hours a day. And we're still required to have a full almost 7-hour day of that. So my students, they're just ready to graduate. They are sad about missing prom and they're sad about missing graduation. But overall, they said that if we went back to in person, they would not take that, and their parents would support them in that because, the students I teach, a lot of poor working class, Black and brown students, COVID has hit their communities very hard. And they know that, like, even if the CDC says one thing, they've gone to work and they've caught COVID at one point, or their families caught COVID, or they've, lost family to COVID. It's, I think that's why, like, overall majority Black and brown families are not sending their kids to in person. And only 20% so far of families have even opted in.
That's it. That what you just said, about them forcing you to have so much screen time.
Yeah.
That once again speaks to what we were talking about earlier, but it also speaks to the disconnect because here in our state, all of the teachers are working, but the parents had the option. You could opt into in person or opt out and do online. And I've got 2 children that's still in school, both in high school. So you would be teaching them, and we went and met with the teachers prior to the school year starting, and they both wanted to go online for various reasons, but they allow the teachers a lot more flexibility here to put together lessons and things like that. And they do the screen time like what you're talking about. That's available to the students if they want to go in and watch it. But also, at 16, 17, 18 years old, they recognize that at some point these children are going to have to learn responsibility, as they enter the workforce, and they're close to entering the workforce if they're not going to go to college. And they kind of put the onus on the children and said, if you're not getting it, you're going to have to come to school in person. But if you're making good grades, you can continue doing this, and we're just going to kind of give you your work. And I can tell you, she just turned 18 this past month, an 18-year-old daughter that was consistently a C/D student, because she has some anxiety, social anxiety issues. This went to an AB honor roll student this year, and it's really, it speaks to allowing these teachers the ability to meet the needs of students where they're at, as opposed to trying to force this blanket,
one size fits all.
Authoritarian crap on all these teachers and the students in general. So.
Yeah, I would say, like, just the whole overall, like, the overarching thing about the pandemic that makes me so mad is the bosses, the capitalists, have have these expectations that we produce at the same rate that we would outside of the pandemic. And if we can't do that, that's on us as workers. And, I think it's most naked on display when it comes to the teachers fight, but it's happening absolutely everywhere. And what does that mean? That means that because we are working harder, the cost of masks, the cost of transportation have gone up for, workers, that we're actually getting compensated less for doing more. My days as in my 17th year of teaching now, I could, some lessons I could honestly teach practically asleep. I could just do that. But this year, it's not like that at all, because teaching online is not the same as teaching in person. Right. There's just so many things that you lose out of it. You can't really do group work in a good, with fidelity. If a kid is having a bad day, I can't just walk around the room and kind of say, hey, how are you doing? Because, most of the kids just have their cameras off. So I can't tell if a kid is behind, the screen smiling and, into it, or if they're moping, or if, frankly, they just logged in and then walked away. And that's not to put it on kids. They're going through this also, and to have the same expectations that they had beforehand is just, I think, so unconscionable. And Bernie was really good at putting this out there about, people that fell into bad luck with money. He said, it's not your fault. Yeah. I think that's the message that we need to keep carrying through this pandemic is, there's been so much death and despair. And, if we're having a day where we're not productive, it's not our fault. And, the bosses shouldn't be exploiting that.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point about funding, and I'm sure you've seen it. I don't know if Jacob's seen it. I actually was listening to a brother, on the drive in talk about just come out yesterday that Mayor Lightfoot, 60% of the discretionary spending of the COVID relief money that went to Chicago, $300 million went to police.
Oh, no.
And it's like, you're forcing teachers to go back to school. From what I've read, they said that they were going to have these petitions up, but they didn't provide any way of funding for the petition. So it sounded like, from what I read, it sounded like the administrator said, yeah, you may wind up having to buy it yourself if you want partitions for the, but yet we're going to turn around and spend 60% of the funding, the discretionary funding, on cops. And it's like, come on, man. What are you thinking? I mean, it just speaks to the. I've been to Chicago a few times, and I love the city, but I really hate that mayor.
Yeah.
I mean, I really, really hate that mayor.
Yeah. I mean, well, and so let's talk about some of the fights that you've had with the mayor during this time. Like, what have they been, because the thing, obviously the thing that gets thrown is that, y'all don't want to go back to work because you hate having to work and you hate your kids. And that's obviously, if you listen to you now, you can tell that you've got concern for your children and you want to be able to you want to be able to see them in person and teach like normal. And that's, what you're looking for is not, you just said working remotely is more difficult for you. And so what have y'all been asking for, and what has the administration been giving you? And ultimately y'all did accept an agreement. So let's, talk to us about what the final agreement was. And if anybody's got a question, we can go ahead and queue you up, 1-866-494-9866 if you want to call in. But Kenzo, tell us about the fight that you've been having with the Chicago Public Schools. And you've got about 1 minute before we go to a break. So,
well, David, I'm glad you brought up the police thing, because even beyond that, the school budget had $30 million in there for student resource officers, which are cops in the schools, which we as a union and community groups fought to get taken out because the mayor says we're broke. Why are we, backdoor funding the CPD through school budgets? Mm-hmm. The city budget also had the police funded through other revenue streams other than, the usual CPD. And now we're seeing that COVID funding. One thing I also want to bring up, $300 million going to the police, $2,000 went to the Office of Disabilities for pandemic funding, $2,000. So these fights over the budget and a people's budget, that has been the core of it for a very long time.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison. This is News Talk 770 AM, 92.5 FM, WVNN. News starts now.
Even as power is coming back on, many in southern states are being told to boil their water because of utility failures due to the extreme winter weather.
President Biden is now deciding whether he'll visit Texas this week to assess the damage. He says he knows people need help, but he doesn't want his presence to be a burden as so many people are still suffering.
ABC's Trevor Ault in Houston. Some COVID vaccination sites converted to water distribution sites. The Biden administration saying vaccine shipments delayed by winter weather are getting back on track. Nearly 6 million delayed doses expected to be delivered within the next week. Overseas in Myanmar, 2 anti-coup protesters shot dead by riot police who fired live rounds today in Mandalay, Myanmar's second largest city, says local media. In Moscow today, a court rejecting Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny's appeal against his prison sentence. Meanwhile, the country facing a top European rights court's order to free the Kremlin's most prominent foe. Dave Packer, ABC News.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time, but the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maple, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtandj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms. People across Alabama are hurting. Elected leaders have bailed out corporations while sending only a one-time cash payment to working families despite record unemployment and a public health crisis. Hometown Action is fighting for working people across Alabama to build inclusive and sustainable small town and rural communities. Hometown Action demands that Congress pass a people's bailout that expands health care, sends cash payments to families, and invests in green jobs to restart the economy. Now is the time to act. Learn more at www.hometownaction.org. The Valley Labor Report is also supported by listeners like you. If you value the work that we are doing, injecting a different perspective into talk radio, and you have the means, consider signing up for a monthly donation on patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. Again, that's patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report to support our work and keep us on the air.
The Dale Jackson Show, a safe space for terrible people. Weekdays, 7 to 11 a.m., only on WVNN. WVNN.
Welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host David Story. On the line, we've got Kenzo Shibata, host of Class Time Pod. He is the functional vice president of the Chicago Teachers Union and an educator himself. We've been talking to him all morning about the Chicago Teachers Union, about the what it's been like being a teacher in the middle of a pandemic. If you've got a question for him or for us, give us a call. 1-866-494-9866 is the number. Again, the number is 1-866-494-9866. So Kenzo, tell us a little bit more about the fight that y'all have had with the reopening agreements. What have y'all been pushing for as the teachers, and what has the administration been trying to get you to do?
So starting the very beginning of this school year, the problem was that the union was demanding that the board sit with us to negotiate what this would look like, and we had real solid plans about committees that could be formed, like how we could actually work with some of the actual educators that work with the Board of Education to hatch a plan that would work for students. And I know we had ideas for social emotional learning, which I think is critical right now for a lot of the students that are feeling very isolated. and the board refused to work with us. And, one thing that's really telling recently in an interview with Mayor Lori Lightfoot was that she says, I think that the union is trying to run the schools.
Yeah.
And I think that the CTU has political ambitions. And I'm just like, damn straight. Like, that's what a union is.
Who knows better how to run the schools than the teachers union? Yeah. Amazing.
But, so I think that went into like a lot of their resistance was they are ideologically opposed to having teachers and, not just teachers, but like paraprofessionals, clinicians, all the folks that we represent actually hatching this policy. So because they created a fight out of it, we wanted it to be cooperative. They, us to work together collaboratively. They turned it into a fight. And then we called for a meeting of our House of Delegates at the end of last summer to talk about a strike. And then the board backed off. They, at that point, I think they were very smartly did not want to have a strike. We didn't want to have a strike. We were fully prepared, but we did not want to either. And they said, okay, distance learning, but they wouldn't give any solid, like, okay, for this year or anything like that. They just said, but as soon as it's safe, we're going to have in-person learning. And so that became like a continuous fight where our union officers were negotiating with the board over, what PPE would look like, what, building cleanliness, social distancing would look like. And I have to say the final agreement that we got is far in a way better than what the board gave us. So like the fact that we were pushing a possible strike, lots of, work actions, our officers working around the clock, negotiating, we got a really good package. I still voted it down. And the reason why is because I've worked for this Board of Education for 17 years, and I know they're not going to implement this with fidelity. Yeah. And lo and behold, that's already the problem we're having.
Well, you just said that 10 years ago you won a nurse in every school. 10 years ago you won a nurse in every school, and you still haven't gotten that implemented.
Well, a year ago we won that.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
But we increased the ratio 10 years ago. And that was just never a conversation. So like our ability to fight for it in 2019 started with our 2012 contract fight. But the thing with a nurse in every school is, yes, we agreed with the board to have a phase in over a few years because they cried poor and said we can't hire these nurses right away. But when we said that, we were saying, okay, this is the floor. There's nothing that prevents the board from hiring nurses at a faster rate than they are right now. And had they done that, we'd be in a better position to open up schools. We have schools that are opening without nurses right now. And with, teachers that are mostly not vaccinated yet. This was just not the time. And the negotiations, even though we were negotiating a package to reenter, the bottom line was that we wanted to negotiate on the start date for in-person. And that was something the board was not legally compelled to negotiate over. So they determined that it was going to be immediate, even though they weren't prepared by any means for that. And so we had to take it, I think. Even though I voted down the package and it won by 68%. I think the reason why it won wasn't necessarily that educators trust the board, but they worry about their students. And we worry about our image in the public. That's something I had to talk a few members kind of down off the ledge about, because I'm just like, the parents still like us. It's, these reporters. And not even the local reporters. The local reporters are doing fairly decent work right now. It's MSNBC. It's, Lori Lightfoot can be on Meet the Press and give her talking points. And they never invite union leaders. And all of these things compound and break down morale. And I think that's why the majority of our teachers took the deal. And we're still fighting now to get it implemented.
Yeah, it's those national Democrats that you spoke about earlier, Rahm Emanuel being one, that now that Biden's elected, everything's wonderful. Everybody can go back to brunch. We can send all the kids back to school, and then hey, it's sickening, is what it is. Yeah. It's absolutely sickening, like, to the core. God, I hate these people. I know we're on a radio show, and I'm trying not to vent, but God, it's
Well, I mean, I don't think David. I don't think you follow Kenzo on Twitter, but I mean, he's been having he's been having exactly the same kind of reaction. Is that like how disgusting it is that these national Democrats are just like in many cases now that Biden is elected, they're like, all right, back to brunch. Teachers get back in the classroom, like everything. Let's go back to normal. Nothing is wrong, and it's so and that speaks to MSNBC is supposed to be the liberal thing, but they're a corporate news network. They are not worker that you just said. Like that's amazing to me that they won't even try to give the facade of being interested in what the workers are thinking by not even bringing on union leaders to berate them. Like they won't even give them a platform.
Here's the problem: is it's not just the workers. This is the problem that nobody's talking. I hadn't seen anybody talking about it, but a lot of the children no, I'm not going to say a large majority, but there's certainly a small subsection of children all across the United States. I work with a guy that's 70-something years old, and he's taking care of his grandson who's about, I think he's in kindergarten or first grade. And they say, well, it's not going to affect the kids. No, it may not affect the kids drastically if they get it. But when they bring it home to a 70-year-old grandparent that's supporting them, their only support because their parents are in jail, it's your constituents. And they know this. They absolutely know it. They're covering it up and hiding all of these talking points. And I don't know for what reason. I have no clue how it benefits them politically to do this. It's just, it's asinine.
Yeah, the situation I'm in, my wife is immunocompromised. She has breast cancer. And so that's like the top of our priority. Like we are extremely careful. And I just feel like the Board of Education doesn't have any room for like humanity. And that's one thing that's really upsetting. And, one of the things I immediately applied for a distance teaching exception in the case that they do recall high school teachers. And, it's funny, I got an email saying that was rejected and that I would have to report back to school. And high school teachers weren't even expected to. So, that part was a mistake, but like honestly, it was rejected. And they said it was because they have a need for extra teachers. So it was eventually rescinded because it was a mistake. But I'm still on deck in case they do recall high school teachers back to the classroom. What worries me about that is even though my students overwhelmingly, I don't think are going to sign up for in-person, that as we're part of our agreement with the board for elementary school teachers who have already been called back was that if you have no students, you can work remotely. So like if you have 15 second graders and all 15 families work or, apply for or want to have distance learning, then you can teach them distance. And the board is rescinding on that. So I'm assuming they'll do the same to me.
Yeah, that's insane. I mean, if all 15 of your students are electing to go to distance learning, like the only point of saying you've got to come into the school is just cruelty and power and showing you like we can do, like we're the boss.
Yeah,
that's the only. There's no. I mean. That's crazy, and y'all are being made out like you're the bad guys. It's insane. It doesn't make any kind of sense at all. And like you mentioned earlier that most of your poor and black and brown students, they're being trotted out in the media as, oh, the teachers don't care about these marginalized communities because they're the ones that are being hit worst by remote education. Well, they're also the ones that are being hit worst by COVID, and so they are electing by a majority of the folks in these marginalized communities are electing to keep distance learning. And so the audacity to trot them out as a meat shield and throwing them at teachers when they're doing what the majority of these communities want, to keep them safe, to ensure that remote learning is a possibility. I mean, it baffles me. It really, really baffles me.
Yeah, and I think it baffles all of us. I think it's just, I got a brother that I told you about when we came in. His wife's a school teacher. She had to go back to teaching, she come down with COVID just last 3 weeks ago, and he said she had it. And they're a young couple, 2 children, probably about 6 and 8, and he said she was terribly affected by it, and then brought it home to her kids. And it's like, there's no concern for human life, and it's like I said, I don't understand what the political. It's almost like genocide. I don't get it.
Yeah,
I have no clue where the political posturing comes from that this is acceptable.
And like, it definitely was the mayor being like a juggernaut, because as soon as they opened up like the first phase in, which were 50 schools, every school got a case of COVID in it and had to, deal with that. And she's still pushing ahead for all this, even though we have data right now saying, the idea of having a slow phase in was so we look at the data afterwards, like, oh, was this a good idea? It's proven to be a bad idea, but she has a bone to pick with the union. I think that's her bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it sounds like. And like you said, whenever she said last week about it appears that the teachers union wants to take over the education.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah. What's the bad part of that? How can we fire your mayor and let the and let the teachers union start running education? I mean, we talk about it weekly. The workers should run their industry. It's as simple as that.
We tried running Karen Lewis for mayor at one point, but then, cancer sucks, and it took her.
Man, I can't. That's just so. The universe is cruel. Like, I just can't imagine Chicago with Karen Lewis as mayor. That would, talk about being a beacon for the justice and humanity, like New York and LA are supposed to be. They're supposed to be these liberal progressive bastions, and they've all got these corporate Democrats leading them. And Mayor Karen Lewis, that would have been that would have been so cool.
There's so much energy. I went to the first canvassing meeting for that. It was in an old church, and there were just hundreds of people there shuffling around with literature. What could have been?
Yeah,
we gotta find our next candidate now.
Yeah. Well, Kenzo, we've got one more segment. We're gonna take a break real quick, and we're gonna come back. We haven't got any calls, but we did get one question from a labor organizer in education, a good brother of mine. He had a question for you, and I'll pose it to you. We'll let you answer it on the other side of the break. He said he'd love to share more on how y'all grew CORE and identified potential leaders and activists, and what advice do you have for education activists here in Alabama? So we're gonna get Kenzo's answer on that on the other side of this break. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
The Valley Labor Report is also supported by listeners like you. If you value the work that we are doing, injecting a different perspective into talk radio, and you have the means, consider signing up for a monthly donation on patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. Again, that's patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report to support our work and keep us on the air. People across Alabama are hurting. Elected leaders have bailed out corporations while sending only a one-time cash payment to working families despite record unemployment and a public health crisis. Hometown Action is fighting for working people across Alabama to build inclusive and sustainable small town and rural communities. Hometown Action demands that Congress pass a people's bailout that expands health care, sends cash payments to families, and invests in green jobs to restart the economy. Now is the time to act. Learn more at www.hometownaction.org. The American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE Local 1858, believes all workers are entitled to fairness, dignity, and respect. AFGE also knows that the best way to guarantee proper treatment is for workers to stand together, united, looking out for each other. In AFGE, we fight for workers every day to ensure a workplace that is safe and free from harassment. If you're a federal employee and want to be a part of this union, to protect yourself and your fellow workers, call 256-876-4880. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years. providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time, but the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maple, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtandj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
WVNN.
Folks, welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host David Story. On the line, we've got host of Class Time Pod and functional vice president of the Chicago Teachers Union, Kenzo Shibata. And I asked him, and he's going to answer good brother of mine asked if you could expand on how y'all grew core and identified potential leaders and activists, and what advice you'd have for educators and education activists here in Alabama.
So that is a great question, and there are many ways that we approached that. One of which was we had a campaign. It wasn't like, this is a problem I think a lot of reform caucuses run into when they try to form within unions, is they know that their leadership is corrupt or calcified, or there's some reason why they just don't like their leadership. So they'll form, a reform caucus, and their bottom line message is they're bad, we're good. And that does not motivate people. And for the most part, 10 years ago in particular, people did not care about the internal politics of their own unions in the vast majority of the time. So you talk to someone and say, the leading caucus is bad and we're good. And people are like, I don't know what a caucus is. I don't care to hear about it. It doesn't impact my life. But at that time, the Board of Education was closing a lot of schools, about a dozen a year. On top of that, doing this process called turnarounds, where they would fire every single person in a school building if the test scores dropped below a certain number. And that includes like janitors, cafeteria workers. Like the idea was every adult in the building has failed the children.
Jeez.
And you need to hire a brand new staff. So the material conditions have changed at this point for a lot of our members who had felt like they had more job security. So we did that. We approached this in many different ways. One of it was we would hold rent parties, kind of like a mutual aid attempt at fixing the problem. And, for educators who lost their job and needed it. And it was great for organizing. It brought people, to come to these events, to talk and listen and join. But, you couldn't really scale that up. We couldn't, if 12 schools are closed in a year, we can't pay everyone's rent just by collecting money. So, we became more political at that point, and had we would do like speaking tours at schools that were on the list, they would call it, every year. Like there would always be a long list of schools that were up for closure, and then they would always whittle it down to 12 to have this media narrative that the Board of Education cared basically. But yeah, what we did was we helped those schools fight to stay open, and a lot of those early folks that were fighting to keep their schools open saw CORE as the only place working with them, that the union leadership had very little to help. So, we had our own media arm, we had our own organizing arm, we had kind of a flying squad that would show up to, any kind of solidarity actions, and just being very political, but not just political in the sense of contrasting us with another group, but actually fighting for something. And that parlayed into us getting involved in the pension fights, and kind of our trial balloon. Before we ran anyone for union office, was we ran a couple of our members for pension office and for our pension board. And that got us to kind of test out our electoral capabilities. And, that's how we charted out where we had our supporters in which schools. And, we would send them out, the candidates out, to talk to members. And then we also, as ourselves, as core members, became surrogates and spoke them up and passed out literature. And from that, we grew our base from there. So, getting involved in fights and being very visible, it has two different positive outcomes. Like, one of them is, you get involved in the fights, and like us, you eventually grow and you take over your union. However, if you have a savvy union leadership that maybe they were just kind of sleeping for a bit because no one nudged them, if they see a little competition, that might just make them be more responsive too. And then you don't have to necessarily run against them. So just being political and being active had helped us hugely.
Right. What did you do to identify some of those, potential leaders in their schools and things like that?
That's a great question. We had a steering committee. And the course still has a steering committee, but the steering committee, we would come together and, we would talk about the school visits we had and debrief and, mention people that we'd met along the way. And because one of the things you have to do to run for union office in a Chicago Teachers Union election with, at that point, I think we had 25,000 members, you have to run a slate of 100 people. You have, your officers, you have an executive board, which like I'm on now, that's how I'm a functional vice president, but I'm still teaching. And then you have about 100, actually maybe up to 150 delegates that go to the American Federation of Teachers conventions and the Illinois Federation of Teachers conventions. So that gives you an organizing goal, to build your ranks together. So we knew right away that we needed to have not only, 100, 150 people, but we needed to have a certain amount of people that would be committed to being on the executive board, to being on the board of trustees, being on, all these different roles. So, we had conversations about it. And then eventually, when it came to putting together our slate, we had to just put out a call for people to apply. And, we'd evaluate people. The first time we ran, to be honest, we had to just bring in friends and family sometimes to fill up the entire slate, which didn't turn out bad. That could turn out very bad if you don't have like your kind of your ethics of your organization really ironed out. You don't have, principles of unity. But that's how we're able to do it the first time around. And then over the 3 years of being in office, we met new activists and they made it into the fold. Some people wanted to take a step back. So it's a constant fight, or not in fight, but it's a constant thing to be developing leaders.
Yeah. Kenzo, we've got about 2 minutes left. What would you leave people with that have been hearing the things about teachers, specifically the Chicago teachers, but teachers all across the country in the mainstream media? What would you want them to know?
And make sure you plug your show.
Yeah, plug your show. Plug your stuff.
I would say the one thing I would want to get across is that this is the ruling class cracking down on a gateway to the middle class, which was teaching. And for me, I grew up poor, but teaching put me in the middle class. It got me decent insurance, and I'm not alone in this. And right now, because of austerity, they're coming for us. And we are now no longer considered part of the professional managerial class. We are being proletarianized, so to speak. And this means we need to have solidarity with all workers. We, as teachers, cannot think of ourselves as a union of professionals. We're a union of workers, and we need to expand the labor movement and be fully a part of it. So that's what I really want to get across, is that, we are all workers. And, whether you like it or not, that's where we're at. So we have to organize. And to hear little pearls like that, check me out on Class Time. Go to patreon.com/KenzoShibata. That's patreon.com/my full name. And you can subscribe to the podcast, and love to have you part of the community.
All right. Kenzo, thanks so much. We really appreciate it. Definitely check out his podcast, Class Time with Kenzo Shibata. This has been the Valley Labor Report, and we will see you next week.
WVNN Athens, WVNN FM Trinity, a Cumulus station. It's 11 o'clock. News starts now.